There are apparently two versions of me, normal Ari and the other one. The other one once nearly ended a sibling relationship over an eraser. Not even a good eraser. One of those tiny white ones that has already been rubbed down into a sad little rectangle. Maya had it. I wanted it. She said she was using it. And suddenly this seemed like the greatest injustice any human being had experienced. Maya! She looked at me. What? That's mine! No, it isn't. It basically is. I still don't know what basically is means, but at the time, I believed it passionately. Ma came into the room. What's happening? She took my eraser. Maya held it up. This is mine. And Ma did something very annoying. She didn't immediately begin the international eraser investigation. She looked at me for about 2 seconds and said, "When did you last eat?" I was offended. What did food have to do with justice? I'm not hungry. Ma disappeared, which I assumed meant she had recognized the seriousness of my argument and gone to find legal representation. She came back with a banana. I ate it angrily. This is possible. You can peel a banana in a way that communicates enormous disappointment in your family. And then, about 10 minutes later, something extremely suspicious happened. I didn't care about the eraser anymore. Same Maya, same eraser, same enormous injustice. Except now I was sitting on the sofa, wondering why I'd nearly declared war over stationery. And that gave me a question I couldn't stop thinking about. If hunger was the problem, why hadn't I felt hungry? Because surely hunger should feel like hunger. Your stomach growls, you think about food. Maybe you say, "I'm hungry." Very straightforward. Except apparently my body doesn't always send me a polite notification. Sometimes it sends, "Maya is unbearable," or "This homework is stupid," or "Why is Dad chewing like that?" So I started investigating, and I noticed something. There are moments when I don't think. Something feels different inside me. I think, something is wrong with everything outside me. The maths question becomes ridiculous. My sock becomes offensive. Someone asking me to put my shoes on becomes an unreasonable attack on my freedom. And the weirdest part is, in the moment, I completely believe my explanation. I'm not thinking, my body may need something. I'm thinking, everyone has suddenly become incredibly irritating. Which raised another problem. If I don't notice the body signal, what exactly am I noticing? I started paying attention. And apparently, sometimes my patience notices first. Before my stomach says anything useful, my patience gets smaller. Tiny things become bigger. Waiting becomes harder. Noise becomes louder. A normal question feels like one question too many. And suddenly, I understood something about the great eraser disaster. Maybe the eraser wasn't the beginning of the story. Maybe I had entered the story earlier. I just hadn't noticed. But then I found a problem with my theory. Because sometimes Maya really is annoying. Sometimes homework genuinely is frustrating. Sometimes Dad asks a question I don't want to answer. So how am I supposed to know whether I'm reacting because my body needs something, or because the thing actually bothered me? That turned out to be much more interesting, because eating doesn't magically make every problem disappear. If Maya breaks something I care about, I'm probably still upset after a sandwich. If homework is confusing, it may still be confusing after a banana. But the size of my reaction can change. That's what I hadn't noticed before. The problem might be real, but my body can turn the volume up. And if I don't know the volume has been turned up, I assume the situation deserves exactly how enormous it feels. Which made me wonder, what does this look like from the other side? From Ma's side, she doesn't see the 2 hours before the eraser. She doesn't feel what I feel. She sees me suddenly shouting about a tiny piece of rubber. Parents often enter the story at the loudest part, so naturally they think the loudest part is the story. But maybe it isn't. Maybe sometimes the story began much earlier, quietly, inside the kid. And that gave me another question. If even I don't know what's happening yet, how is Ma supposed to know? I think this is where things usually go wrong. Because when I suddenly explode over something tiny, adults naturally look at the tiny thing. Why are you getting so upset about an eraser? Which is a reasonable question. Unfortunately, at that exact moment, I may have absolutely no idea. If you ask me, why are you behaving like this? My brain will find an answer. Maya, the eraser, homework, Dad's chewing, that sock. I can build an excellent case. But Ma had accidentally done something different. She didn't only investigate the argument, she investigated me. When did you last eat? And I hated that question because it sounded like she wasn't taking my eraser crisis seriously. Except, 10 minutes later, I didn't take my eraser crisis seriously either, which was inconvenient. But it still left one big problem. What if Ma isn't there with a banana every time my body starts whispering? Because eventually, surely, I need to notice some of this myself. So I started looking for smaller Ari, the version of me before full disaster Ari arrives. And smaller Ari is much harder to spot. He doesn't necessarily say, "Hello, my body requires fuel." He just gets slightly less patient. Things feel slightly harder. Waiting becomes more annoying. My brain starts using words like always, never, everyone, everything. Maya is always touching my things. Dad never listens. Everything is annoying. Which is interesting, because when my thoughts suddenly become enormous, sometimes the problem hasn't become enormous. I have become less able to carry it. And that's when my investigation stopped being only about hunger. Because hunger is just one example of something bigger. Sometimes the body knows something before the thinking part of me understands it. Maybe I'm tired. Maybe I'm thirsty. Maybe I've been sitting too long. Maybe I've had too much noise. Maybe something simply feels physically off. But the first thought in my head may not be, my body is sending me information. It may be, this day is terrible. And that changes the question. Instead of only asking, what's wrong? Maybe sometimes there is another question hiding underneath it. Where did this feeling start? Outside me? Inside me? Both? I like that question because it doesn't mean the feeling is fake. If I'm hungry and Maya annoys me, Maya may still have annoyed me. If I'm exhausted and homework frustrates me, the homework may still be frustrating. My body doesn't cancel the problem. It may change how loudly I experience it. And I think adults sometimes know this about themselves without realizing children might experience something similar. Dad has a version. He'll come home after a long day and start opening cupboards. Then he'll say, "Who finished the?" Ma will look at him. He'll stop, eat something, and 20 minutes later, civilization returns. Nobody calls this a tantrum. Apparently, adults call it, "I had a long day." Very sophisticated. But noticing all this gave me one final problem. Because if every bad mood becomes, "You're just hungry," that's annoying too. Imagine being genuinely upset and someone hands you toast. So I don't think the answer is deciding that every big reaction has a physical explanation. I think the useful part is learning that a reaction can have more than one ingredient. The thing that happened, plus the condition I was in when it happened. Same eraser, different Ari. Same homework, different Ari. Same little sister. Unfortunately, still Maya. And maybe that's why some reactions seem to come from nowhere. They didn't. We just noticed them late. By the time everyone else sees the shouting, the story may already have been happening quietly for a while. Which means maybe growing up isn't only learning how to control my reactions after they arrive. Maybe it's learning to recognize myself before they get that big. The smaller signals, the shorter patience, the everything is annoying feeling. The moment when the world suddenly seems to have become much more difficult, and maybe the world hasn't changed at all. Now, when that happens, I don't always catch it. Sometimes I still believe the eraser has destroyed my life. But every once in a while, I notice, I stop, and I ask myself, is something wrong around me? Or does something feel wrong inside me? Sometimes the answer really is Maya. But sometimes, I just need the banana.